Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, Texas A&M, rolling into 2025. Look, there are a lot of reasons to believe in this program going into the fall. Now, what's really unique about this football team, as opposed to a lot of the other Texas A&M teams we've seen in the past, is look, there's a little bit more identity to this football team going into 2025. Texas A&M has received the national media buzz and national media attention heading into a college football season pretty much every single year for the last decade. And it's always stemmed from, hey, really talented roster. A roster on paper that we think can go with any program across the country. I look at this Texas A&M team in 2025 and say, look, the national media buzz a little bit quieter around Texas A&M than we've seen in the past. I think that's because look, you look on this roster and say, I don't think it's the most talented Texas A&M team we've seen in the last decade, but here's what I do believe. I believe this is probably the best identity we've seen from Texas A&M over the last 10 years. And what I mean by that is, look, there was a lot of talent on some of those Jimbo Fisher Texas A&M teams. Ain't nobody arguing that. But when you looked at all that talent and said, hey, how do they want to win football games on the field? Didn't really have a clear answer. And that always played out in the college football season where it was just a bunch of talent that really never could come together and put it all together. I look at this Texas A&M team and say, look, I ain't saying this roster ain't talented because it is. But there's a little bit, not a little bit. I would argue it's a lot more of a clear vision of how we want to run our program in 2025. Look, we want to run the football behind one of the best offensive lines in the country, with one of the best running back rooms in the country, and we want to play good defense. The vision for Mike Elko and Texas A&M in terms of what kind of football team they want to be in 2025, that is clear. And that's never really been all that clear for Texas A&M in the past. Look, my excitement around Texas A&M does not have to do with them having the most talented roster that they've had in the last decade, but I really do think this team has the opportunity to be the best version of Texas A&M because they have that clear identity in terms of how they want the talent to come together. Mike Elko's been very intentional in terms of how he's built this roster over the last 24 months with a very clear vision in mind. I think that the best example is go look at a team like Alabama. I think Alabama is a really, really talented football team. The concerns I have for Alabama is Nick Saban recruited a roster how he wanted to win football games. And now Kalen DeBoer takes over. And look, Kalen DeBoer wants to win football games in a little bit of a different way. And so, although Alabama has a very talented roster going into 2025, I'm not necessarily sure how they're going to want to win football games every single Saturday. I can say that for Texas A&M. Like, I know how they want to win. That clear identity and that clear vision of how Texas A&M wants to be, that's what fires me up the most. It's not the most talented team we've seen from Texas A&M, but it might have the best identity we've seen from a Texas A&M football team in a very long time. Now, I want to get into what that identity and continuity looks like. I want to talk about some other, at least in my really important storylines to monitor, saying, hey, if this is the best version of Texas A&M we've seen, what needs to take place during the next couple of months? Before we get into it, as always, the Texas A&M fans, appreciate you guys. And I kind of view this season as a culmination of like an 18-month discussion around this program where I think we've broken down dang near every single commitment that Mike Elko has landed, whether in the portal, whether on the recruiting trail. Now we get to see all the pieces start to come together in 2025. To the Texas A&M fans who've been rocking with the boys for the last 18 months, we appreciate you guys. If y'all are new, you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Going to be a really fun team, at least in my opinion, to talk about over the next couple of months. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, look, if this team is the best version of Texas A&M we've seen in a very long time, it starts with the identity of this football team. Couple of things that I want to get into. Number one, that this rushing attack has the ability to be maybe the most prolific rushing attack we see, not only in the SEC, but gosh darn it, like try to find me another team that's going to run the football better than Texas A&M. You have so many things pushing Texas A&M in the right direction when it comes to the run game. Starts with a really talented, but not only really talented, a very experienced offensive line that's played a lot of football together. To really emphasize how talented I think Texas A&M's offensive line is, go look at some of the transfers that Texas A&M lost, particularly a guy like Cam Dewberry, who I think was the seventh or eighth offensive lineman on this football team. Everything I've heard out of Alabama rolling into fall camp is Cam Dewberry has a very good chance to start on the offensive line for Alabama, has a very good chance to be a very good football player. So if you're telling me Cam Dewberry, who is deemed by this Texas A&M staff to be maybe the seventh or eighth guy on the football team, Cam Dewberry is going to Alabama and potentially starting and potentially being a difference maker for Alabama, that tells me that the guys that are on this roster should be pretty dang good. And I think you got an offensive line coach in Adam Cushing who's done a phenomenal job. And so I think it starts with an offensive line that has multiple dudes that will be playing on Sundays, that is built to absolutely ass kick up front. This offensive line is going to be good. And then you look at Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens and say, hey, there are a lot of realities where that is one of the better running back duos, not only in the conference, but in the entire country. Marcel Reed and what he can bring to the Texas A&M run game. Along with this, kind of tying it all together, Coach Colin Klein, he's an awesome offensive coordinator. Now, I've been very vocal about what I think of Coach Colin Klein. Well, guess what makes him one of the best offense coordinators in the country? I think he's one of the best at scheming up a run game and dialing it up. And he's got all the pieces. He's got all the ingredients to have a really effective run game in 2025. That's where it starts. Then continuity. Like there's just not a lot of teams in this conference that return both coordinators, return pretty much the whole coaching staff, return pretty much the whole offense on the offense side of the football, absent a couple of difference makers you've injected into this program. There's a lot of continuity. 10 years ago, that didn't matter. Every team had continuity. That wasn't really saying anything. In this day and age, college football, continuity matters. Having guys that have played together for multiple years. Texas A&M has that in a way where they weren't even close to that in 2024. There was so much new, not only a new coaching staff, but new players. You saw that play out in terms of the lack of consistency you saw from this program every single week. With all that continuity, Marcel Reed coming back as the starting guy, Colin Klein building the offense around Marcel Reed, adding some difference makers around Marcel Reed. I say this is a team that you feel like you're going to get more consistency from every single Saturday, which has really been the biggest Achilles heel from Texas A&M in the past. Now, number two, now you talk about, hey, what needs to come together? Well, Marcel Reed needs to be that guy, especially when you start talking about the expectations that I think this fan base and coaching staff have for this program. It's not to go 8-4. I think we all know that. It's to go 10-2, make the college football playoffs and compete for a national championship. Although I said at the top that this might not be the most talented roster Texas A&M has had, there's zero doubt in my mind this roster has the talent to compete at the highest level of the sport. They're going to have their foot in the door from a talent standpoint, but you need Marcel Reed to be that guy. And when I look at Marcel Reed, look, I think Mike Elko showed us, and this is the most important storyline. All of these national media talking heads, they can have takes along with me. I'm going to get up here and talk my takes as well. I don't really care about what everybody's talking about Marcel Reed and how everybody's talking about Marcel Reed. I care about what Mike Elko showed us. Mike Elko said, hey, we think Marcel Reed can be our guy. And so instead of fishing around in the portal for a replacement for Marcel Reed, Texas A&M said, hey, we're going to use our funds. We're going to use our resources to build around Marcel Reed. I don't think anybody has a better feel for Marcel Reed as a quarterback than Coach Colin Klein and Mike Elko. And them showing me that they have confidence in Marcel Reed to be the guy matters a heck of a lot more than what anybody in the media is talking about with Marcel Reed. Now, that's not absent of, hey, we got some things to clean up if you're Marcel Reed. It really, the biggest frustration in terms of how people talk about Marcel Reed is this kid can't throw. The arm talent is there for Marcel Reed. I think a lot of what needs to come together is between the years. Marcel Reed, the real problem we saw with Marcel Reed was he was kind of a one-read guy. drop his eyes, go be an athlete. That's not to discourage Marcel Reed from being an athlete, from being a playmaker, of which we know this kid is. But if Marcel Reed takes that step in 2025, you're probably just going to see a little bit more processing from him and being able to go from one read to the second read and then maybe go lean on your athleticism. But it felt like a lot of the times in 2025 here, or 2024, that is, it's a little bit squirrely. And I think a large part of that was maybe we just didn't have difference makers on the outside. I don't think that was a top half receiving group by any means for Texas A&M in 2024. Very well could be in 2025. As much as we just got up here and talked about the run game, this is a very, very good wide receiver room that, in my opinion, is night and day different from what we saw in 2024, particularly from the skill sets that this team has. Look, I think we all know Marcel Reed attacking the deeper third. He's not elite. That's kind of what Texas A&M had last year, like a guy like Noah Thomas who just wanted to run go balls. Noah Thomas was a guy that, although I think very talented, probably lacked a little bit of consistency. It never felt like it came together for Noah Thomas. For Marcel Reed as a quarterback, along with the Coach Colin Klein offense, I would argue that having dynamic receivers with the football in their hands and yard after the catch opportunities, that's probably more important to a quarterback like Marcel Reed and Coach Colin Klein than having your 6'5", 200-pound go ball guy. And what I mean by that is, look, Marcel Reed wants to get the ball out quick. He is very, very fast release, very accurate inside of 10 yards. We want wide receivers that we can get the football to quickly in space and go make plays with the ball in their hands. Who was that guy for Texas A&M last year? Plot twist, there wasn't that guy. There wasn't that guy that when they had the football in their hands, you were holding your breath. Now you have KC Concepcion, who I think is one of the best in the country in terms of yards after the catch opportunities, and a guy like Terry Bussey, who I think has the opportunity to be that kind of guy too. You still have access to the deeper third. You know, Mario Craver was a guy as a true freshman at Mississippi State, averaged over 20 yards per catch. And he's a guy that goes 10.69 in the 100-meter dash. He can cook vertically if you want him to. So that's not to say me getting up here and saying Texas A&M is not going to have the ability or difference makers to push the ball down the field, but they have wide receivers that have the skill set that better fit what Marcel Reed wants to do in the short intermediate game, as well as Coach Klein designing this offense. Can Marcel Reed bring it all together? You're going to need a step from Marcel Reed. There's no question about that. He's going to have to get better as a football player, which why would you not believe in that? You know, year two as a kind of a, first time being a full-time starter, but got a lot of starting experience last year. The opportunity for him to rep with the ones all off season. I think it'd be rather foolish for us to expect Marcel Reed not to get better as a football player. And then you combine that with just better things around Marcel Reed and a run game he can lean on. I'd be stunned if Marcel Reed wasn't a good quarterback in the SEC. Now the question is just how good Marcel Reed can be. Now, defense. Here's my argument with the Texas A&M defense. Does it get better as a unit, even though it might have less talent? Especially on the defensive line. Here's the thing that stands out to me. Look at the names that are highlighted in red. You don't really have any in your one deep. Your returning starters are guys that were with this football team last year. That tells me you got a lot of continuity. And the problem with Texas A&M's defense in the 2024 year was not they didn't have talent. It wasn't they didn't have the Jimmies and the Joes. I would argue that they were really talented last year, just didn't really come together. Year two with all of these guys returning, do they have a better understanding of what a head coach like Mike Elko wants to do on defense? And it sounds like Mike Elko is going to be a little bit more involved on the defensive side of the football than he was year one in 2024. Although the talent might not be as dominant, especially on the defensive line that we saw last year, I don't think it's crazy that this Texas A&M team gets better on defense just because everybody's a little bit more comfortable with what they're doing on the defensive side of the football. We see this a lot. Go look at a guy like Kirby Smart when he first took over at Georgia. Go look at Dan Lanning when he first took over at Oregon. These defensive-minded coaches that we expect in one offseason to figure it all out. That doesn't happen. But guess what happens in year two and year three? That those defenses start to figure it out a little bit more. It's kind of what you're hoping for Texas A&M on defense. They got the talent. I could probably pick you out 6 or 7 guys that will be selected in the NFL draft on the defensive side of the football after this year. The talent's not the problem, even though it might be less than it was last year. Can this team play better as a sum of the parts? I think I got that one right. I always try to do that one, and I almost never seem to get it right. All right, last one, real quick. Better in the margins. This is a really big storyline too. You talk about the difference between 8-4 in the SEC and 10-2. It's not as wide as many people like to think. 120th last year in penalty yards per game. Like, you talk about losing 1 or 2 football games just because you're making stupid mistakes and committing penalties. That'll do it when you're that bad. Can you get a little bit better there? Can you play better defense in the red zone? I believe Texas A&M was 86th in red zone defense. If you can clean up some of the small stuff too, which I kind of expect to do with all this continuity that you have coming back, that's another reason this Texas A&M team can take a jump. I guess what I'm trying to say here is Texas A&M, for the first time in a long time, probably flying under the radar because they might not have as much talent as they've had in years in the past. With the continuity and identity that this football team has, and if you see Marcel Reed be the quarterback that I think Mike Elko thinks he can be, there's a very good chance this is the best version of Texas A&M we've seen. We'll see. I think it's going to be a really fun. For the first time, it's not like we're just believing in Texas A&M because they're talented. There's a little bit more substance behind my belief in Texas A&M in 2025. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.